Welcome to EPS 520, and we will going to make data analysis on energy markets, and hopefully with real data, with simple Python codes. The best way to do an analysis is to work with an analyst, which is better than you, which is better than probably all of us. So I would like to introduce one of the best analysts in Turkey, the director of Shura, Dr. Değer Saygın. Değer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation, Barış Bey. It's a pleasure for me to attend this first lecture of your course. And I first of all wish you all a very successful course. I understand it's a challenging but a very also fruitful one. And I will be talking a little bit about energy analysis and the role of energy analysis in all the energy sector debate. Especially in terms of the decarbonization efforts and global energy transformation. But before that, please allow me to very briefly introduce myself to you, what I did so far. As Barış Bey has said, I'm the director of Shura Energy Transition Center, which is a local and national think tank operating in Turkey and only for Turkey. It's an independent think tank working also on energy transition issues, and it's the first and only one, which has been established 3 years ago. And so I'm the director of that. We have a small team of 8 staff people, and also working on the technology, financing, and policy issues of what energy transition could mean for Turkey and how that can be accelerated with energy efficiency and renewable. So the 2 pillars of energy transition. And I started working there in end of 2017, so that's been 3 years now. And before that, I spent around 5 years of my career at the International Renewable Energy Agency, which is an intergovernmental organization headquartered in Abu Dhabi, with an office in Bonn, Germany. And I was in the Germany office working on innovation and technology issues. And Turkey is also a member of this organization. And there I have led a program for the countries called the Renewable Energy Roadmaps for 5 years, which basically it was basically the arm of the Sustainable Development Goal 7, looking into the renewables. If you know the Sustainable Development Goals, so it was focusing on the renewables pillar of that. And I'll try to talk a little bit on that today later. And before that, for about 8 years, I was in the Netherlands as a consultant and researcher, and I also taught chemistry at the Utrecht University, but also I was a consultant there for working for different Dutch and European, but also international companies and organizations. And I also did a PhD there in my free time at the Utrecht University. But overall, I'm a graduate of environmental engineering from the Middle East Technical University. I have not really done engineering nor environmental related issues, but focused predominantly in the past 15 years of my career on energy sector. So I'm very also happy to meet all of you, and I hope you know about Shura. Otherwise, I'll try to introduce Shura today to you. And I hope that it's also going to be a reference for your future work, studies, and analysis, what we do at Shura. But I'll try to cover Shura and my past work at IVENA today, and what this global energy transformation, energy transition is, and why it is important to understand energy analysis in this context, in particular from a policy perspective. So there's a number of key messages which I hope you would take back home from today's presentation. One of them is, of course, on the climate change debate, which we increasingly hear, and it has become even a more popular issue during the COVID pandemic. Even the average citizen here is now aware of that, and energy sector is at the heart of that, actually. And I'll show that why it is. And the energy sector decarbonization is on the way, it's progressing, but it requires even more urgent action on a global scale, because we are certainly not on the path to decarbonization that is in line with the Paris Climate Agreement goals. Well, as I mentioned, it is underway and we need to do more to reduce carbon emissions, and I'll show how that could be done. And what it means, decarbonization of the energy sector. So by 2050, so in principle, 3 decades from today, we need a nearly zero carbon energy sector. So no longer carbon emissions to be emitted. Of course, there are many routes to that pathway. Energy efficiency and renewable energy are 2 of them. Electrification is another. But overall, it's not only a technology issue, but also policy issue. And it's not only the private sector which can act towards it, but there is a need for long-term planning from the government perspective, developing strategies and understanding what energy sector transformation means for itself, but also for the economy, for the society. So it's benefits beyond just energy developments. And 2 pillars are efficiency and renewables. But all in all, I think, which is also important for you from this broad picture, there is a big role for energy analysts to play. I was an energy analyst myself for 8 years in the Netherlands, really crunching numbers. And that's where I learned how to write and do analysis. And now, as a local think tank director, I try to do my best to contribute to the national policy making in Turkey. So it's a big learning. It's a steep learning curve, but it's at the end of the day the core starting point for any energy-related career, in my view. So going back to the climate perspective, if you look at the data published by NASA, very frequently this data is updated. In the past 25, 30 years, there has been a fairly linear increase of the global temperature, the average global temperature increase. It has increased around 0.03 degrees per year and has been decreasing linearly. And if we follow this path, basically in the next 3 decades, we will reach an average increase of 2 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial revolution time. And the 2 degrees Celsius is actually what the Paris Climate Agreement is targeting to limit the temperature increase. Ideally 1.5 degrees, but 2.2 degrees is the target. So that is by 2100, so that's in end of the century, but we will reach that 50 years before by 2050. So this is an alarming result, an alarming path. And if we look at why this matters so much, actually it comes in different angles of risk. I think most of you are hearing the climate change risk, and this picture from the IPCC 1.5 degree report displays that. The higher or the darker the color, the higher the risk. And the risk color, as you see, increases as the surface temperature change is also increasing. So let's look on the left side. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard about the typical and very unfortunate impacts on the Arctic, on the mountain glaciers, and also the coral reefs in the oceans. These are the unique and threatened systems because of the climate change. And what we also experience very often, and sometimes this also comes to our country, Turkey, as well, heat waves, heavy rains are also common high-risk categories of climate change adverse effects. But overall, of course, there is effects just beyond that. Disproportion effects is one worrying thing, because the average temperature increase of 2 degrees is the average for the world. But when we think of that, actually certain regions, and especially the region where we are, will be even more impacted, the Mediterranean region. So there is certain parts of the world which will face the consequences of climate change even more. There's of course the monetary damage related to the insurance companies, etc. So what happens to the infrastructure, which is an adaptation question. And there's these type of also risks pertaining to the climate change. So there's a whole range of actually worrying issues. And I spent especially extra time on this slide because it's not an easy problem to solve the climate change, and it comes with many issues to the society and also our economy. When we think of the very first slide I presented, and I mentioned there decarbonization of the energy sector, and this displays a large portfolio of climate scenarios looking into the global situation and how or what type of emission pathway the world should follow. Basically, if you look at the current situation, of course, exclude the COVID pandemic effect, we are emitting in the order of around, say, 35, 40 gigatons of CO2 emissions annually. And this emission amount needs to go to somewhere below 10 gigatons to around, even better, 0 gigatons in the next 30 years. So the green pathway shows what the emissions should follow if we are to decarbonize the energy sector. And are we on that path? That's a main question. And there's many international studies which deal with that, whether the global or the national strategies which lead to the global emissions are following that pathway. If we look at the current policies, that is displayed on the top with a relatively blue color, and that current policy is still a pathway which continues emissions. And of course, there are the pledges and the targets of countries. So pledges in the sense we would like to, we aim to reduce so much emissions, which are by different countries. And then if you look at the targets, they are below the current policy pathway. So the current policy is the least emission reduction effort, and the pledges and targets are somewhere below that. But if we want to be consistent with 2 degrees, that is the wedge indicated by the yellow waves, that is a decrease of, let's say, around 20% compared to the pledges and targets by 2030, and the 1.5 degree Paris compatible is even halving or more than halving compared to the current policies, and that line going to 0 by 2050. So the effort is massive. Why energy sector matters? Globally, the energy sector represents 2/3 of all the greenhouse gas emissions. So the greenhouse gas emissions is the main driver between climate change, and energy sector is 2/3 of that. And within the energy sector, that's on the right-hand side, if you look at the breakdown, electricity sector is around 40% of all energy sector CO2 emissions. So electricity sector is very important. And that's why you see all the country efforts, the market, the private sector is focusing on the opportunities which can benefit, which they can benefit from the electricity sector transformation with renewables and energy efficiency. So that's very good. But solving the decarbonization problem of electricity sector is not the solution. It's not going to solve the decarbonization problem. The other 60% comes from transport, and that's often a hidden sector. We don't think of that always. The industry, so producing cement, steel, bricks, plastics, and so on. And then you have the buildings sector, which is the residential and services. Here, we also need significant action. And energy sector, of course, among all other branches of the economy, I think it's getting a bit dark here, but with all other branches of the economy is, of course, under the focus of the global policy efforts. And as you may follow at the United Nations in 2015, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals have been put in place. And the 7th Sustainable Development Goal, which is the affordable and clean energy, actually deals exactly with this energy system transformation. It has 4 distinct goals, the SDG 7, Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is called the affordable and clean energy. And under that, we have 2 of them dealing with access to clean energy resources. So when we are in Turkey, this may not sound much important for us, maybe with the exception of some rural areas, but that is also not really much in Turkey. But many countries in the world, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, Caribbean, Southeast Asia, there is an access problem to electricity. There is no electricity. So the population needs access to electricity. And another problem, which we don't often think of, is the combustion of traditional sources of biomass for cooking and for domestic water heating, but mainly for cooking. This type of fuel use is just causing significant indoor air pollution problems. It has also lots of social and economic adverse impacts, especially on women, but also children, that it is a problematic use of a fuel. And this needs to be also, to the possible extent, substituted with clean and modern energy resources for cooking and for domestic water heating. So SDG 7.1.1 and 1.2 deal with this. The other two deals with the deployment of renewables and improvement of energy efficiency, and that's what it's also interesting for Turkey. But before that, let's look at where we stand. In the 2010, about 1.2 billion and 3 billion people were lacking access to electricity and clean cooking, respectively. And that number has been declining especially for electricity access, but not much is happening for clean cooking. So there's much more progress needs to be done to achieve the SDG 7, because the SDG 7 aims for, by 2030, to make these two top numbers zero. And if you look at the bottom indicated with orange, the renewable energy share in the total final energy mix is around 18%. And the SDG 7 aims to accelerate that significantly. And the energy intensity, which is basically how much energy you consume in primary energy terms per the dollar of economic activity you generate, measured in PPP, that is 5.1, and that needs to decline much faster, so much faster improvements in energy efficiency. Energy intensity improvements, the target is 2.6% per year improvement. What we are having is around 1.8, and I'm sure the other speakers from intergovernmental organizations will update my numbers. They're slightly outdated, but it's in the order of 1.3 to 1.8% per year improvements. This needs to be by 2.6 by 2030. So we need to double the rate of energy intensity improvements in the coming 10 years. So, but we are not there yet. In terms of the total final energy demand, so this shows, the darker the color in this map, it means that you are consuming much more renewable energy. And we are, as I mentioned, at the global average, we are at 18 or just below 18%, and this needs to be much higher. So 18% is renewables, 82% is either fossil fuel or another type of energy carrier. This needs to be 18%. So you may say the Africa countries are doing great in terms of renewables, or the Asia countries, but in reality, the very high numbers in Africa is explained by the uses of traditional biomass, meaning you burn wood in an inefficient, in an unsustainable way, as I just explained. In a renewable perspective, yes, this fuel is renewable, but it's not modern, it's traditional. So, so this picture needs to be much more darker in all the parts of the world, in Russia, to North Africa, to Europe, etc. We need to increase the renewable energy share. If you look at the split of renewable energy share, the dark brown part, the traditional uses of biomass, is what I just explained. So within this 17–18% share in total energy mix, the brown part is pretty much half of it. So that's quite questionable. And this is something what the SDG is trying to eliminate. So replacing this brown part with modern renewables. And the rest is what we call modern renewables, including modern biomass, green part, blue part, hydropower, which is common, as you know, also in Turkey, liquid biofuels like ethanol or biodiesel, and then you have wind, solar, and geothermal, which are all common and pretty much used in Turkey for both heating and for electricity. So the idea is to increase the share of this colorful part on the top to much higher percentages and reduce the brown part. That's the SDG goal in a very simple sense. And the modern part is actually increasing. So we are using more and more modern renewables. And here you see the share. That's because of all the news you hear about the wind and solar. Because we, like in Turkey, but also the rest of the world, is putting much more effort on implementing wind and solar capacity for our power system, which is a very modern, efficient technology. And because of that, the share of modern renewables driven by wind and solar is increasing. So that's very, very good. But it's not only the power sector, as I showed you at the very beginning. We need to do more in transport, in buildings, industry as well. Now, electrification, a few news on this, and maybe you've been in these countries and maybe that's of interest for you. And there's actually a lot of business opportunities and many things which could be done in this area also. Electrification means that all your population has access to electricity. Now, we are in the order of 90%, just below, and we will be reaching, with, according to the policies in place, by 2030, globally 92% electrification, but the target is 100%. So there's still an 8 percentage points that needs to be closed. And there are some success stories like Kenya, maybe you heard about their solar program, likewise Bangladesh, Myanmar, are all countries where electrification is becoming a less problem and people have more access to it. There's two ways you could do that. You could provide a grid investment in your country so people can have a transmission and distribution grid next to their homes, or you could make mini or off grids or just rooftop solar PV systems. So there's many ways to overcome the electrification problem. In terms of the clean cooking, the situation is a bit more worrying because still 60% of the global population has access to clean cooking, and this needs to be 100%. So there is much more needs to be done, and especially in the rural areas, as you see on the right, since the urban areas are a bit better. So this is what we see currently as the global energy transformation picture, but why all this matters and where does energy analysis plays a role. Now, I tried to explain while I speak on the supply, but also the demand of energy. And energy is not something we just convert from one source to another, but it's also something we need to continue the quality of our life. And that's where it becomes important when you start talking about energy functions and energy services. Let's try to define these a little bit. And as I mentioned, energy is used in a society to satisfy the certain human needs. So just now I needed to turn on my light so you see my face, and I have a computer running so I can communicate with you. And it's basically is defined as a product of human activity obtained by the use of energy and satisfying a human need. Quite simple. And just as I just mentioned, for instance, you're working in an office, you need heat in that office so your fingers don't freeze and you can still work, and you have a comfortable working space. And then you deliver a service. Let's say you sell insurance policies, and at the end you generate value for your economy, you make profit for your company, and you earn money for yourself and for your family. So that's, in a very simple way, how the energy function serves the society. Now, as I mentioned, we use energy in different sectors. Buildings is one of them. Lighting, refrigeration, freezing in some houses, cloth washing, drying. Maybe drying is not so common in Turkey. Dishwashing, and other different types of appliance use, but important for space cooling, heating, cooking, and water heating. So across all these different areas, buildings consume energy. If you look at the industry, we use energy for, and which is very big industry in Turkey, iron and steel production. Maybe not so big in Turkey, but we still have a steam cracker and some refinery processes. We have chemicals production, fertilizer production, cement grinding, clinker kilns, process heating, motor systems, and so on. So there's a range of industrial processes which also use energy, and these are needed because we build infrastructure with them: houses, cars, the roads, etc. I'm sorry, there's a typo here. This should be transport. And in the transport sector, there are, of course, and obviously different modes of transportation. Passenger car is probably the most common one, but the emerging one globally, and especially in developing countries, but also emerging economies like Turkey, aviation sector, which is increasing in terms of demand as more and more people are choosing flights over road transport to go from A to B. So that's also becoming an important mode of transportation. So overall, also important and varying modes of transport with all different types of efficiency of converting fuel to motor drive. So to have this energy, where do we get it from? So that's I think an important question. And I think electricity is the easiest one. As you know, there's always a power plant where you burn coal, gas, or you don't burn anything, but you get the natural resources to turn that into electricity. There are also, I guess, you've been in colder Scandinavia, Northern Europe, or Central Asia countries. There are typical combined heat and power plants which produce both electricity and heat, again from different sources. In your buildings, office or residential, there is a steam boiler which is used for space heating, but you can also use a steam boiler to generate steam for your industrial process. Electric vehicles are an alternative to internal combustion engines to deliver you a passenger kilometer. So it carries you for a certain amount of kilometer that has an electric motor, which converts electricity to motor drive. And a light bulb simply provides space light by using electricity. So there's different technologies using different inputs and delivering outputs. And what is energy use? In this picture, of course, I did not go into that, but let me try to elaborate on this here. What I'm talking about, the heat which comes out of your radiator in your house is actually a useful energy. So that's what you use. But before that, the heat which is delivered to your radiator is a final energy. That final energy has been converted with a steam boiler from a primary energy source. And what is that primary energy? So primary energy is starting with the extraction from Earth, or in very simple terms from Earth, that energy is extracted, such as coal. It's converted, there may be sub-conversion steps of that coal, and it's transported, maybe stored, distributed, and that coal is brought to your steam boiler in your building, and that coal is converted from its primary form to the final form, which is producing steam, and that steam or hot water is then delivered to your room to produce space heating, which is the useful energy. So that's the chain from primary to final. And this is quite important in the context of energy analysis, because some people talk about primary energy, some people talk about final energy. And if you look at the conventional energy statistics or energy balance of a country, of a region, what you see is both. You have the primary energy supply, and then you have the use of final energy. Apologies for having a mixed slide here in both English and Turkish, but globally, we are using more than or nearly 14,000 million tons of oil equivalent primary energy. And the final consumption actually is around 9,000 million tons of oil equivalent. It's split roughly equally between buildings, industry, and transport that you see on the right-hand side. What's interesting here, there is nearly 5,000 million tons of oil equivalent lost from conversion of primary energy to final energy. And that conversion happens predominantly in the electricity sector, because what you put in the gas into the power plant is, let's say at the best case, 60–65% efficiently converted to electricity. And a coal-fired power plant is much less. And in a nuclear power plant, standard factor is 33% efficiency. But all in all, there's a lost or own consumption for auxiliary uses in the power sector, which reflects that difference between primary and final. Now, I've mentioned tons of oil equivalent, which we also use in Turkey, ton eşdeğer petrol, which is a very common unit of energy. And it derives from calories, which was the old unit for quantities of heat. And the ton of oil equivalent is defined as 10 to the 9th of kilocalorie. But what you also see very often, when especially people have a background in the oil sector, barrel of oil equivalent. And if you're looking and talking with people from China, what you also commonly hear is ton of oil equivalent. That's what they use for their energy balances. We use in Turkey tons of oil equivalent. In Europe, people use petajoules, exajoules, and in the US, what's very common is also BTU, British Thermal Unit, and watts per year is also useful. But all in all, one would need to be able to read all these different units, but also convert and work with them. I'm sure you're all have the background to this. Maybe this is very simple issues, but these are very basics of the energy analysis. Now, exajoule is very commonly used, and 1 exajoule is 10 to the 18 joules. And let's try to convert that. 1 exajoule is also 24 million tons of oil equivalent. That's you see on the bottom. 1 exajoule is 1,000 petajoule, and 1,000 petajoule is 280 terawatt hours. That's roughly the consumption of electricity in Turkey. And in Turkey, Istanbul consumes around 1 exajoules of all sorts of energy, and Turkey consumes around 6 exajoules of all types of energy, electricity and other types of energy. So that's 1 unit. The US is much bigger, and Turkey is, Istanbul is similar to the consumption of energy in Australia. So just to put all these in perspective. And also, I think at the start of this discussion today, Barış Bey has asked me why hydrogen matters should be expressed in kilograms or in different units. And that is actually quite a distinctive definition when it comes to energy carriers. I won't go into details of the difference between higher and lower heating values. I think you discussed these among each other, but I'm expressing everything here in lower heating value, which is the standard in Europe. The US, Canada, and some other countries use higher heating value, but the heating value, so from 1 kilogram of energy carrier, how much energy can you extract if you burn it? A hard coal or a coking coal, which you use in electricity or the steel industry, has an energy content per kilogram of up to 30 megajoules. A brown coal, which is in lower quality, and that's what people refer to when it's lower quality, lignite typically, is actually the quality of energy content in it. And that is, could be, say, up to 3-4 times lower compared to the hard coal. Crude oil, by comparison, has a lower heating value of around 44 megajoules. Crude oil products like naphtha and other types of oils are all in this order. Jet fuel is one of them, which is used in aviation. Diesel also has a roughly similar per megajoule kilogram lower heating value like any other oil product, but because its density is less than 1, it's in the order of 0.8, the diesel per liter megajoule is around 36. So different ways of expressing energy. Gas, by comparison, per cubic meter, it's between 31 to 38 megajoules of energy. So each energy carrier has a different energy density, energy content, and that is what makes them more efficient or also more resource intensive or less resource intensive when they are used to produce heat or electricity or other types of energy we need in our lives. Now, let's talk a little bit about what energy analysis is. Sorry. After all these definitions on energy. So I've talked about the energy supply chain from primary energy to final energy. And in different stages, as I mentioned, at the extraction, coal mining, in the conversion power plants, oil storage units, and it goes down to the conversion devices like boilers, and then to the useful energy like heating, cooking, lighting. And energy analysis does not look at one part of this. It looks at the entire chain. So if you're an energy analyst, you would need to be able to deal with the analysis of the end use, but also you would need to be able to understand what's happening in a wind turbine or in a gas drilling field or a production field. So these are all different parts which the energy analysis science deals with. Now, in a historical perspective, energy analysis has actually gained a lot of attention. And I will try to take you briefly through that chronology. Energy analysis interest was limited till end of the 1960s. And always the central question was, how do we supply energy? So supply was the biggest issue because we were continuously demanding more energy. So Energy analysts looked at mainly the left-hand side of that figure, which I just showed you on the supply side. And up from 70s, focus expanded from supply to the use and production and inputs for the production of different types of goods. And this was in line with a growing debate in the society. Actually, there is no abundant supply of energy. We cannot just take that for granted, because you may have followed the international literature. This is 4 or 5 decades ago, but these are authored or very popular books and reports. Club of Rome study pointed out that fossil fuels actually are being depleted. And what's very interesting and important, OPEC was founded in these times, which was dealing with the supply of oil and its role in the economy. And also, the nuclear energy was becoming more a problematic issue. It was initially thought as an alternative to fossil fuel, which is also the case now, but there were also concerns on risks, safety, and nuclear weapons have stirred the debate on the nuclear energy. And in the chronology of these events, several very authoritative journals, which are also still being used and being published, different authors also from Turkey, are sharing their work with the scientific community. Energy policy, annual review of energy and environment have become started to be published as scientific journals. If you go to these journals, they are still being published in different volumes, issues, and there's a lot of energy analysis work here. But the chronology did not finish with this, and now the question was, what can we do to limit energy use and limit its possible adverse effects? And here, analysts started to focus more on low energy scenarios and what type of opportunities, what of technologies, at which sectors we need to do what. So what I showed you at the very beginning of this lecture. And the scenario understanding has then also was mixed with an energy efficiency analysis type of work. Because energy prices have increased, crude oil prices had a 10 times increase in 10 years, and energy efficiency suddenly become an important policy question, and then the analysis focused on how do we save energy. And this has been linked then with more environmental problems. Asset deposition was a problem. And also with the emergence of new energy conversion devices, new cars, new boiler systems, new power plants, also the assessment started not only at the sector level or at a certain environmental issue, but it was also looked into the potential and understanding of individual technologies. So analyzing, let's say, an electric vehicle. What is the inputs and outputs of that system? And also, which is, I think, important, and that's important in the context of energy system, because energy system is not just an isolated system. As we've seen in the COVID period, what happens in the energy system impacts the entire economy and also environment. And simulation models have been developed, which looks into how do we solve an energy, climate, environment, whatever type of related question with the least cost energy mix. Let's say we want to have 10% emission reduction in Turkey in the next 10 years. What would be the least cost energy mix to achieve that? So this type of optimization problem, and it's also understanding the impacts of such optimization on the overall economy. But suddenly in the 85, when energy prices declined, energy issues were off the table also. So energy analysis has lost its popularity, but now it's a very core sector. I really find myself very lucky that I'm in this sector for the past 15 years as an analyst. And because now in the context of this climate change discussions, energy analysis is a core subject. Now, a few words on the future of energy transformation. And I tried to explain a bit the past of that, where we stand, why energy analysis matters in this context. And now, very briefly, let's look into the future in the next few minutes. Energy transition is actually not a very new phenomena. It looks very new, transition, transformation, nice words, but the humankind has went through that several times. We've used wood until the Industrial Revolution. Then we started using coal peat. And then we have discovered petroleum, and with the striking discovery of also the internal combustion engine and the sales of autos, the petroleum use has increased significantly. Then gas was discovered. It was known before also, but gas was mainly discovered in the 50s and gained a large share for electricity generation. And since the last 30, 40 years, we are looking into the renewables. And energy transition is enabled by energy resource availability, but also the use of technologies. For instance, if you look into the gas, the Netherlands, has started using gas because they discovered it. And they transitioned from coal to gas. So that's a resource availability. And for instance, in the past, people were using whale oil for lighting, but then kerosene was used because suddenly whale oil was on short supply. So there are different reasons. And now if you look at the reason of the transformation we live today, it's because wind and solar technology is becoming much cheaper. And that's what's changing the electricity sector now. And looking at the current global situation, roughly a quarter of all electricity is supplied by renewables. In Turkey, it's around 50% now. So in Turkey, we are twice as much as high in terms of renewable energy share compared to the global average. And so that's very important. And it's not only hydro, it's also wind, solar, and geothermal. But globally, it's around a quarter is renewables. And this has been increasing primarily because of solar and wind. And here you see the capacity additions in each year. I won't go into the details of the statistics. Actually, I should have updated this, but since 2012, for the new capacity additions in the global power system, there is more wind and solar being added to the system compared to any other energy carrier. This is striking. Solar on its own is the first in the line, and then wind, and then others. It's not coal, it's not gas, it's not nuclear. It is, since 2012, renewables, and that's because the prices, the costs of these technologies are increasing. And here is a representation of that. This is the latest database of costs, where solar PV costs, that's you see in the left second group of dots. Here, if you look at the blue line, that's the cost of electricity generation, so the cost of producing 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, that is declining significantly, very rapidly. And Turkey, if you look at the first results of our renewable energy auctions, YEKAs, were below the global average. So very important outcomes also happening in Turkey for solar, but also for onshore wind. And solar PV is now nearly on par with wind, so very close. Very, very promising developments in the renewables. But it's not only costs, of course. There have been many different drivers for energy transition. For instance, an interesting case, Costa Rica, environment was a very important reason. Economic benefits and economic growth is, of course, very important for Turkey, but it's not only for Turkey, but also for countries which are net exporters of fossil fuels like Saudi Arabia, but also they are losing markets in the global world because there's energy transition happening in other countries. So to replace that oil exports, they are looking into options for renewables. So there's many different aspects to that: economic activity, costs, environment, energy security, which is also important for Turkey. So there's a bunch of reasons why energy transition is happening. I won't go into most details of this, but there's a few success stories. I would be very, I would suggest you look into the developments in Germany, because that's a good example of long-term policy making and consensus-based policy making. So involving all different actors and agreeing on a plan. China is very interesting because China has abundant resources for coal, but they see the potential to become the global leader in producing renewable energy equipment. And so they also benefited from that in their own planning to become a transforming sector from coal to renewables. So that's an interesting one. A country in the North Africa, Morocco, is similar to Turkey in the sense very limited resources of gas and oil. Of course, I'm excluding the new gas which we have discovered, and that was very important in the North Sea, in the Black Sea, and so, but still looking into the resources. availability, Morocco and Turkey were interestingly similar. But what Morocco did, they have developed an important 2030 plan for their power sector to say we will supply 50% of our electricity demand from renewables. Likewise, in Norway, they have decided, and they are the leader in EVs, because they provided all these incentives, economic and policy incentives to transform the transport sector. So there are plenty of examples of success stories in energy transition in different sectors, not only power. And there's a lot which also we could take from other sectors and other countries, and Turkey is also progressing on that. But maybe in the very last minutes or so, I will pay attention to the next 30 years, because that's how I started. And let me finish with a future outlook. And this is results from the International Renewable Energy Agency's decarbonization scenarios, which as Shura we also contribute to in their analysis. And the top orange line is the business as usual. So if we continue with today's policies, that will limit the energy-related CO2 emissions at the stable level. So nothing will decline if we go with current policies, or maybe a slight decline, current policies plus pledges. But what we need to be is below 10 gigatons of CO2 emissions by 2050. And that means a significant reduction of CO2 emissions. And what can crucially play a role there is renewables, electrification with renewables, and energy efficiency across all energy supplying and using sectors of the system. It's an important and a striking finding, but it also shows it is possible with energy efficiency and renewables. Now, are we on that pathway? No, we need to do much more effort. On the left-hand side, you see the energy intensity improvements. That needs to be 2.8% per year by 2050. So the target of the SDG 7 was 2.6%, if you recall, by 2030, and this needs to go above that to 2.8, and we are at around 1.8. So we need to increase that by 50%. The renewable energy share was 18% today. It needs to be 65% by 2050. So a significant jump. And in the primary energy supply, also a similar share in renewables. Now, finally, at the sector level, what that transformation implies in the transport sector, a massive electrification. Today, you see the little circles here. 1% of our transport sector is globally is electrified. That needs to be 33%, which means nearly 1 billion electric vehicles on the road. This is just passenger vehicles. And more than 2 billion 2- to 3-wheeler electric vehicles also on the road. A significant transformation of these sectors. And if you put that in perspective of Turkey, Turkey now also has set its vision to 2030 for 1 million electric vehicles at least. And we are at around 1,500. So we have also started the transformation of our transport sector. And that's a big and important start also with the local manufacturing capacity of Turkey's own EV. And that will need to take us to those levels so that we can contribute to this global transformation as well. At the building sector, again, a large electrification. So you see that again in the middle, more than half of all demand of energy in buildings need to come from electricity. And in Turkey, it's around 20% now, but also, of course, with more consumption of electricity in our houses, in the offices, this share will increase with growing economy. And but it's not only the electrification, but how we also supply our space and water heating. And solar thermal or solar heating, cooling systems is important, and Turkey is in the top third globally. And that needs to increase in the entire world, as also in Turkey in our building rooftops and heat pumps as well. Industry, the manufacturing industry is a complicated one because it's a relatively hard to decarbonize sector. That's why there's so much talk on this in terms of hydrogen, green hydrogen, which can provide an important alternative to all types of fossil fuels in steel production, fertilizer production, and so on. And here, I think from experience, this is the hardest sector to decarbonize, and this is the area which needs most attention with all different technologies, efficiency, renewables, green hydrogen, but also carbon capture, storage, and use options. And final slide on the power sector, and this is, I think, an important one. As I mentioned, a quarter of all electricity demand is from renewables, and this needs to increase to up to 85%. And the remaining 15%, a mix of gas and nuclear. And this is important because of this 85%, 50% needs to be from wind and solar. So there is, the market currently is taking us through these trends, but it needs to accelerate significantly. And as I mentioned, as we stand in Turkey, around half of our electricity supply is from renewables, and solar and wind is exceeding 13%. So these are my words for today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I was able to show you a little bit of what's happening in the global energy transformation, what needs to happen so we can solve the energy sector problem contribution to climate change by 2050, so in the next 3 decades. I tried to give some hints on Turkey, but I did not spend so much time on that, and I'm sure other speakers will do so, and you will do that in your lectures. But all in all, energy analysis, to be able to read these pictures, to be able to contribute to the urgently needed policy making, energy analysis is the starting point. We need to analyze the energy systems, understand what's going on, so we can assess their potential for efficiency, we can assess how much renewables we can use and what technologies we need and we don't, and we can also estimate their costs and benefits. So thank you very much again, and I'll pause here, and any questions, happy to answer.
Okay, guys.